Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be ranking every fighting type Pokemon in competitive. Whether this accounts for doubles, singles, you name it, we're going to be tiering it today. So if you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more tier list videos like it, leave a like on the video and subscribe. Comment down below your guys' tiering ideas, I guess, for whatever type we do next. I will say that the next one is going to be Psychic. As of recording this video, I just put the grass one up yesterday, and so many people have been asking for Psychic between the last two videos, so that will be the next one, I promise. It's going to be up on Friday, but if you want any other tier lists besides Psychic, comment it down below. With that said though, let's get into the tiering format. For anyone, of course, who does not know how I have gone about the tier lists, let me explain. For those new viewers, the S+ tier is the highest we're going to rank anything. It's going to accommodate for Pokemon that are top 5 or top-ish in the Nat Dex Anything Goes set, the Sword and Shield Ubers, or their Pokemon that are very dominant in VGC. Like, again, the top 5 or around top 5 Pokemon. This could extend a little bit, of course. Like, maybe it might not be a literal, like, 5th best Pokemon, but it's around that sort of range where it's at least in the conversation. For the S tier, these are for Pokemon that they don't necessarily dominate the metagame. They just happen to be really good as far as a Sword and Shield Ubers, Nat Dex AG, or VGC setting. For the S tier, that also might include, however, a really top tier Pokemon, like let's say Landorus Therian if we were doing a ground tier list, because Landorus Therian is that dominant in the OU setting for Nat Dex and Sword and Shield, and VGC too. Landorus would truthfully, I've been using it as my example a lot, but Landorus truthfully probably could have been an S+ Pokemon. It still is really good in VGC even still, and is borderline like a top 5 Pokemon in that format. For the A tier, this is for Pokemon that are decently viable in OU, they're banned to Ubers, but for some really bullshit reason, or there's some Pokemon that are decently usable in VGC, but they're nowhere near like a top influential Pokemon. For the B tier setting, this is typically where you're going to find your low-end OU, your mid to high-end UU, or even just your really niche VGC type Pokemon. C tier is where we start to fall out of the VGC rankings. It's really just singles at this point, unless I'm bringing up specifically a function a Pokemon can provide in VGC by coincidence. This is typically where you'll see your RU Pokemon, maybe your low-end UU or your high-end NUs. D tier is going to be mostly NUP mons, and F tier is either for Pokemon that are unevolved but are noteworthy enough to bring up, or they're for fully evolved Pokemon that are so bad, but I have to list them somewhere or the comments are going to ask where their favorite Pokemon was. Speaking of someone's favorite Pokemon that's not great, Primeape. Now, Primeape isn't necessarily an F tier Pokemon, actually. I do think that Primeape has a lot going for it. For one, Primeape has a pretty good ability as well as speed stat. Between the 95 speed and the ability to fight, this actually has a lot going for it. It's got incredible coverage with stuff like Ice Punch, you get stuff like Night Slash for Psychics, you have just your generally strong fighting options with close combat. You have Fire Punch for other Pokemon that I guess you just want to hit. The point being is this has a lot of good coverage. It's a great pivot. It's just a better version of Passimian in my opinion. And I don't actually know why more, and to be fair, I do, so technically I know the reason this gen, because Primeape's not in Sword and Shield, but even still, I feel like that Passimian and Primeape are in definitely a pretty similar territory, because where Passimian has a 15 higher base attack, Primeape's also a base 15 higher speed, and that 95 speed actually is a pretty big difference in my personal opinion. I do think this makes the big jump between Primeape being a pretty lackluster Pokemon and having an actual niche over Passimian, considering you could just use this as a faster Scarfer. 95 speed is a pretty respectable Scarf tier. 80 barely makes the cut, but 95 is fairly respectable in my opinion. I'm actually going to put this in the D tier. I think this will probably be one of, if not the best Pokemon we do put in D tier today. I think it's pretty good. I don't know where all the Primeape hate comes from, or maybe just the lack of Primeape love, but I'm kind of annoyed. I think this mon's pretty decent. Come on, let's get some Primeape love. Poliwrath is pretty decent as well. Definitely got better through the recent generations. However, I still don't think that Poliwrath is actually that great, in all honesty. It does miss out on a few things going in its favor. For one, Poliwrath just kind of sucks as a rain mon, and I use that mostly just when we think about like what actually goes on a rain team, right? Let's run through it real quick. So if I'm thinking of rain Pokemon, I'm thinking of Mega Swampert if I'm playing Nat Dex OU. I'm thinking of Zapdos or Tornadus Therian. They're pretty good Hurricane abusers. I'm thinking of Kingdra. Some conversations you might even be able to convince me I was thinking of Ludicolo, depending on when you bring it up. You might be able to convince me that this is a really hard rain team and you're going to throw on stuff like Seismitoad, Ashgren, Crawdon even, or Azumarill. All of these are acceptable answers. Poliwrath is not. I think it's a terrible rain Pokemon. However, water fighting is a pretty good and a fairly unique typing at that. Only a couple Pokemon really have it. Now, Poliwrath's stats are pretty terrible, but it does have a couple things going for it. For one, it's a physical attacker that's immune to Scald, which is actually pretty good. It's not just like a resistance to Scald like a lot of other water, grass, etc. types are. It just has Water Absorb, which is a decent ability for a physical attacker. This generation as well, it got significantly better fighting type moves. You now have options like Drain Punch, for example, and sadly you still don't have close combat. That's very unfortunate. Kind of wish it did. I think that would be awesome, but even still, Drain Punch is a step in the right direction. Poliwrath had such terrible fighting moves in previous generations. Honestly, I still think this thing has some decent coverage even still. You'll get options like Waterfall, for example. I think this also gets Ice Punch. In fact, wait, I'm looking at BDSP. I'm fucking stupid. Okay, this definitely does get close combat. Yeah, I was gonna say, I could have sworn that like that was a big deal for this gen, and I was a little bit surprised. Yeah, because this also gets like Ice Punch, Low Kick, Jab, etc. I knew this had a lot better coverage than the fucking Showdown was leading me on to believe. I always forget to switch back. But anyway, I still think this is a solid D tier mod. I do think that it's kind of okay, and it's, if you were to run this on Rain, I don't think you would exactly be like completely screwed over, but it's not a great Pokemon in my opinion. Machamp, easy C tier. I think there's a case for B for Machamp, and I'm gonna put Machamp Gmax actually at the top of D. I think Machamp Gmax is worse. Initially, I will say, I initially actually thought pretty highly of this Pokemon, but then I realized that Machamp Gmax's max move is the exact same base power as Max Knuckle, but you don't boost your attack. You boost your crit ratio, which is still pretty decent, but on a Pokemon where your one stab is a weaker max move than most of your not max attacks would be, that's pretty detrimental, especially when you kind of have to hope for a crit for any actual net positive from that. It's not even like Max Knuckle, where at the very least, you will always be doing more damage in the following turns. With Machamp, there's no guarantee. Machamp does still have a lot going for it though, as far as base form is concerned. Guts is an incredible ability, same as No Guard too. This is two phenomenal offensive abilities that can take advantage of a lot of very varied sets, I guess is the best way to put it. I was gonna say very varied, but that sounds way too ridiculous. The point being is that Machamp can take advantage of gut sets and go for just a pseudo conk with stuff like Facade, Close Combat, Ice Punch, etc. And if you're gonna go with a no guard set, you have options like Dynamic Punch that are still pretty valuable, as well as for coverage options, stuff like Stone Edge that you could take advantage of. So I do think Machamp's pretty decent, and hopefully it keeps its PLI buffs. I'm not counting those yet because they're not in any sort of actual competitive format, and we know that home transfer isn't guaranteeing any of those moves. But if it does, oh my god, this is a really high B tier Pokemon. Conk finally getting stuff like Mach Punch and Drain Punch is incredible as far as Machamp's moveset goes. These are two moves that Machamp has needed for generations, and I truly do think it would be a solid, like a mid to high end B tier Pokemon with them. But for now, it's a C tier. I did just want to acknowledge that though, for any PLI fans. I didn't want to leave you in the dust because that was truthfully one of my favorite buffs of like the entire game for any previous Pokemon. It was up there for me. Hitmonlee's a solid B tier, and Burden's really cool in this Pokemon, and this is kind of just like the low tier version of Hawlucha in my opinion. We even have seen this like very, very niche in certain other formats, such as VGC. I think has popped off in like I think it was the Series 6 metagame was the metagame where like all the Pokemon that were above a certain usage stat couldn't use. I think I remember seeing this at some point. Even still, this is still a decent singles one, though. Actually, I'm gonna put it, now that I'm thinking out loud, I definitely don't want to put it above Machamp. I think I'm gonna still put it in C though. I think this is still honestly a pretty cool mon as far as BDSP goes, and it's still a pretty decent mon as far as the Sword and Shield metagame goes. But at the same time, I don't know. I think that Hitmonlee's actually fallen off a bit because a couple different things. One, I think that people have kind of caught on to a lot of the unburdened sets being stuff like White Herb or Normal Gem. Most people kind of know how to play around them, and it's fighting type counterplay it's pretty much just the same counterplay as any other offensive fighting type. The difference being though is that Hitmonlee's honestly really susceptible to priority, which is kind of a big deal. I don't know. I think that C is still a pretty fine tiering, but I'm definitely not going to put it above Machamp as confidently as I was thinking of doing originally. I think that Hitmonlee still definitely is a bit underwhelming in that regard when Machamp is just an incredible guts breaker, and I think that fighting types have typically been trending towards more of the gut sets and less so of the Scarfed or the other, really any other set, to be honest. So the fact this can't really take advantage of something like a gut, sadly, is a bit unfortunate. Hitmonchan is the bottom of D. Sadly, I really don't want to put this thing in the F tier. I don't think I can, to be fair, because Hitmonchan does actually have a couple things going for it that are pretty strong. Iron Fist is a pretty decent ability. You have pretty good movable options with stuff like Ice Punch, Fire Punch, Bullet Punch. All they can take advantage of this. I actually don't think that... No, it's Sucker Punch is not boosted. I thought it was Bullet Punch. The point being, though, is this gets a ton of options that are boosted by Iron Fist. It's a pretty solid AV mon. Well, it has the potential to be one, I should say. It's a cool offensive rapid spinner, too. I know that Hitmonlee is as well, but typically people will more so utilize Hitmonchan for that role, from what I've seen. Though him on top of the 3 is by far the most likely to be a rapid spinner. I do know for a fact that PU sets do run Hitmonchan as a spinner. The point being is that this is a decent offensive fighting, and it's one that doesn't really need choice to actually be decent for a low tier setting. So because it's decent for a low tier setting, that's what I'll give it. It gets the solid D tier. I forgot where I put it for a second. Next up is Galar Zapdos, free A tier. I think you can borderline make the case for... No, never mind. I was going to say you could borderline make the case for S, but I definitely take that back immediately after saying it. Galar Zapdos is pretty cool, though. This is a fun Natdex mon. It's a fun Galardex mon. It's a fun VGC mon. It's never going to be some top tier, but this is really good in metas where there's a lot of Intimidate spam. In OU, the best Pokemon in both Natdex and Sword and Shield is Landorus, so Galar Zapdos kind of has a fun time. In VGC, 2 of the best Pokemon are Landorus, Therian, and Incineroar, so Galar Zapdos kind of has a fun time. Galar Zapdos is a mon that I think is definitely also, especially with Spike Moth Cup, really appreciated the not Dynamax format, though that's not to say this is necessarily a not great Dynamax Pokemon either, considering you do still get options like Max Airstream, Max Knuckle, that are both really terrifying in this Pokemon. I know this is actually, from my amount that I have kept on the not Series 12 and 13 metagames for VGC, I know this even during those, but to be fair, other portions as well, like during 11, was running stuff like Power Anklet to try and be a good Trick Room breaker for anti-Trick Room teams, since you, just as a good anti-Trick Room mon, I should say, because you would underpace Pokemon like Incineroar in Trick Room, which is pretty cool. This does have a lot going for it as far as versatility and item slot goes. You can go with stuff like Choice Band, Choice Scarf, Life Orb, Weakness Policy. Really, you have a lot of options here. I think it's a solid offensive fighting. Thunderous Kick is also an amazing move, by the way. It's 100% chance to just drop the defense. This is literally just built in Metronome, but on a Pokemon. Easy A tier. Mewtwo X, solid S tier. I think that a lot of people might disagree with that, but I think that there are definitely better fightings that more represent a top tier fighting than Mewtwo X. Really, there's actually just one in particular, but I'll get, well, yeah, two in particular, but I'll get into those down the video. Mega Mewtwo X is still pretty terrifying, though, as far as an offensive fighting goes. This is an incredible breaker. It's got the options to run both physical, special, or even mixed offenses, and it does it very well because it doesn't lose any special attack from Mewtwo, and it has 190-something physical attack from the Mega Mewtwo X. So this is a Pokemon that has 130 speed, it has like 190 attack, and it has 154 special attack, all in the same offensive Pokemon, and none of its other stats drop below 100. This is an incredible Pokemon, and truthfully, I think if it wasn't for Pokemon like Mega Ray, Primals, etc. existing that just outclass this thing as far as how broken they are, like, this is still an abomination of a broken Pokemon. Like, yeah, it's not as free as Geomancy Xerneas is, and yeah, it's not Primal Groudon level of over-centralizing, but it is still a pretty powerful Pokemon. The fact that it's a 780 BST Pokemon with no bad stats, it's pretty good. It just, you know, power creep has caught up so much in recent generations. Even Pokemon with lower base stats do have a lot more broken mechanics. I don't really want to go into the ones that I'm going to specifically be talking about, though, because they're actually for later in this same video, but we'll get to that later on. The point being is that this is still an amazing offensive powerhouse. It just sadly got outclassed the moment it arrived. S tier. Regular Heracross, this is B tier. It's just better Machamp, in all honesty. It's faster than Machamp. It has about the same coverage as Machamp, to be fair, but the moves that are important on it don't really actually matter because they both get Facade, they both get Stab Fighting, and they both get Third Move along with Protect or Sub. The point being is that I think that Heracross just also having, while it's slightly less physical attack, the speed really is a big difference. Like, it's a whole base 30 faster. And on top of that as well, I think that despite both of them having two really good offensive abilities, Heracrosses are a lot more of a gamble because you need to make them immediately when it comes in. It's either going to be Moxie or it's going to be Guts, and both of them can genuinely cost you games. Unlike with Machamp, where if it's no guard, yeah, it's a good set, but it's not going to cost you the game outright unless you just have really bad confusion luck. So I'm gonna give Heracross B tier. I think this is an incredible mon. Just like with the bug type tier list, I think this is really an incredible fighting type. And Mega Heracross for similar reasons is B. I will say though, I think that Mega Heracross, despite being an incredible Natdex Mega that got stuck in UU Purgatory, I do think that Mega Heracross still has a lot going for it as far as fighting typing goes. It's a fighting type that absolutely shatters opposing psychics. And while I think I gave it a lot of shit as far as the speed drop for the bug tier list, I think it doesn't matter as much for fighting because a lot of fightings typically are more bulky. And for what you would utilize this thing specifically, if you're thinking of a fighting type in your head, right? And you want this fighting type to check opposing psychics, you want it to be a really good breaker, and you want it to be really difficult to switch into no matter what. Mega Heracross covers all those things. It's really good at handling psychics with the second stab. It's really good at handling just in general opposing Pokemon and making it difficult to switch in on. And I forgot the third thing, but the point being is it's really fucking difficult to switch in on. And I guess, to be fair, I probably could have mentioned this in the bug video. It doesn't change my ranking at all, but I probably could have given it a little less shit, considering at the very least it is still a bug type that can handle stuff like rocks and steels. But the point being is that Mega Heracross is pretty good at covering weaknesses of its individual stabs. It's an easy B tier. Now, Hisuian Sneasel, I think I gave this thing like a D tier or a C tier in my poison tier list. I'm looking at the fighting tier list, and I think I'm going to definitely slot it in D. This might change down the tier list, I'll be honest, but Hisuian Sneasel does have a few things going for it. For one, this is a really solid offensive fighting type. It's got a really good speed tier. The offensive stat is to be desired, but 95 is still not terrible. I think this will be a solid like RUNU sort of Pokemon, being a fighting type that can handle opposing fairies. It's a poison type that can handle opposing steels that are immune to it. It's a terribly weak to psychic Pokemon. The point being is that I think this will still have a really good presence in low tier. It's just going to be a slightly faster Toxicroak, and where Toxicroak could benefit from being mixed, Sneasel will benefit from outpacing base 100s, which is pretty fucking good because you don't actually need to care that you don't have priority on this Pokemon. Though if it gets Mach Punch, I would not complain. In fact, I think Mach Punch truthfully would be enough to put this in C tier, I'll be honest, just because you could run Sword Dance cleaning sets a lot more easily. But that would also, and I will say as well, that would change my rating on Sneasler a lot. Mach Punch would be a huge buff for it, in my personal opinion. But even still, the point being is that while it doesn't really change the tiering for this particular video, I do still think that in general, this is still a decently respectable fighting type. And I think it's one that could definitely become a C tier Pokemon, or maybe even B tier depending on the moveset it gets. But right now, just off of Poison, Fighting, and Ghost alone, it can hit every Pokemon that's ever existed for neutral, as far as I'm aware. For what it's worth, I will say though, I think that Hisuian Zoroark might actually be the first, because I'm pretty sure that Ghost is just Poison and Bug, if I remember correctly. I'm really bad with type chart. I'm so sorry, guys. I know it's a disappointment, but if assuming it is, just going off that logic, then yeah, that would be like literally the first Pokemon that could actually switch in on Sneasler stabs. Even still, there are not a lot that can take every single hit for resistance or immunity. I cannot name any others that might even do it, let alone that actually do it. So solid D tier. Him on top. This gets a C tier actually. I'm gonna put this at the top of C tier for now. It's a Pokemon that has some kind of okay viability in VGC, but it's mostly here just because it's decently viable in both BDSP and also even in lower tiers for Sword and Shield. And I really hate that that's the case. I really hate him on top competitively, I'll be honest. I think it's so underwhelming in everything it does, but I can't deny this is a decent fighting type in NU. It's a decent rapid spinner. It can perform pretty well, and Intimidate, and as far as VGC goes, is a fucking broken ability. You get stuff like Fake Out, so you still get the same priority that Instinct gets. You get a lot of good coverage options. You get priority for both Sucker Punch and Mach Punch. Triple Axle is pretty decent actually for handling opposing flying types. You have, in general, just other support moves like Helping Hand. So, I mean, this has a lot of options. I'm kind of shocked it didn't get used more this generation VGC-wise, but I know that it's like one of those things that's always kind of just niche. But it's a cool Pokemon. I think honestly Hitmontop, as much as I think it's kind of jack of all trades, shit at everything Pokemon competitively, objectively I think that Hitmontop does offer a lot to a team. It's definitely C tier Pokemon bias aside. Regular Blaziken, I'm giving regular Blaziken an A tier. This is obviously banned in BDSP OU, but in Sword and Shield in that decks, this is like an OU BL mon. Or a UU BL mon, whatever the banned his list for not getting usage in OU is. And it's still kind of viable in Sword and Shield OU, so I'm not even going to knock it off at that. I think realistically, Blaziken just as a foundational mon, despite not having as much of a doubles presence, is an insanely broken concept for a Pokemon. A Pokemon that has a fire fighting typing, it's already a pretty dangerous offensive typing. This has a way to boost its speed just by clicking Protect. It has really good offenses in both physical and special attack. It has great setup physically. I think it has Vacuum Wave for priority, and I think that there was something. No, it's just Vacuum Wave. I was thinking Radical Red for a second. The point being is this has a lot going for it. I think Blaziken's an easy A tier. I think Mega Blaziken's an easy S tier. Albeit, I do think a Mega Blaziken struggles a bit more on like something such as a Mewtwo with just the metagame not really liking firefighting for Uber specifically, when Pokemon like Ho-Oh, Pedon, and Zygarde all exist pretty well to wall the Pokemon to all hell it back. As well as not even just talking about the super effective shit like Primal Kyogre. You have so many other dragons that resist fire. Giratinas literally are hard walls to this Pokemon. The point being is there's a lot in Ubers that's really unkind to this, so I'm gonna rate it lower than Mewtwo. But albeit I do think that Mega Blaziken is still an incredible Pokemon. The meta just fucking hates it. Brillium's up next. I gave Brillium an A tier, and I still stand by that, but I definitely think as far as fighting types go, it has a lot more competition. Considering as far as grass types went, we're comparing this to Pokemon like Tangrowth, Amoonguss, Superior, and Brillium I think is at least in that conversation of Pokemon. Whereas with A tier, with A tier for fighting types, it is definitely the lowest of the totem pole we're gonna have today, because you're comparing it now to Galar Zapdos, which has incredible presence in like every meta it's in, or at least a noteworthy enough one, and then Blaziken, which is a borderline Ubers Pokemon that's allowed in Sword and Shield. This generation, oh my fucking god, I hate this. The point being is that Brillium is still decent. It still has a lot going for it with stuff like Technician. Spore is an amazing sleep move. It's still a great Poison Heal sub Pokemon. It just, fighting type competition is a lot higher, so it's going to be really low in the fighting type A tier. It's still an A tier though. Hariyama's up next. Hariyama's a decent Guts Pokemon. It's literally just, I would actually put this pretty even with Machamp, I think for different reasons though. For example, if we were to look at, let's say, Machamp versus Hariyama, one thing that Hariyama gets that Machamp does not get is Fake Out. Hariyama actually having this is already a little bit of an edge as far as a doubles perspective goes. There have been some metagames. I remember this Pokemon actually being like fairly not bad in even for VGC for early metagames. Like I know this was decent, or at least this was usable in like really like the first Gen 4 VGC seasons. This was kind of usable in 2017 in like the loosest sense of the word. I remember a couple Trick Room teams running this. With Machamp, it doesn't really have that sort of presence, I think, ever. Even if we were to compare this, so in singles, let's say, Hariyama's legal in BDSP, it's really the only tier we can compare this for, sadly. If we look at Hariyama, it's a decent RU-mon, it's a pretty good fighting, and same as Machamp. I think they're literally both interchangeable. I'm going to give the slight edge to Machamp, and I think that's mostly just because of the fact that Machamp has a lot, well, hold on. Actually, I do need to really quickly pull up Natick's moveset. Okay, no, they literally have basically the same coverage. They're basically the same Pokemon, but Hariyama's slightly bulkier, and also Hariyama can definitely take on any of these abilities for Thick Fat Guts and Sheer Force, and all of them are extremely viable. So I'm actually gonna put Hariyama slightly above Machamp. They're both pretty interchangeable though, in my opinion. I think you could really put either one above the other, and no one would complain. Metacham's also kind of decent, but Metacham has definitely fallen off as far as just a general competitive Pokemon goes. This isn't legal in Sword and Shield, sadly, but it's terrible in BDSP. Well, not terrible. It kept some of the punches, which is kind of good. But it just, again, one of those mons that kind of got shafted by power creep. Still decent Scarfer, though. It's a still cool band Pokemon. I'm going to give it... I think I'm going to give it top of C. Metacham still as a typing is pretty incredible. Psychic Fighting is really hard to switch in around. And even still, this has some cool priority options for stuff like Fake Out, Bullet Punch, etc. So I'll give it C tier. I think the one thing though that I'll take away from Metacham is that Metacham definitely, if it was in like a Nat deck setting or even just a Sword and Shield setting, it would have a lot harder time this time around because of how much helmet goes around and how unbulky Metacham already is. This isn't a Pokemon that could really get away with running protected pads, whereas something like an Urshifu could, for example. The Guts fighting types obviously have their own thing for them, and Metacham's is just sort of built in pure power and hoping that you don't take a bunch of helmet damage. So I think it would be a little less favored in I think it would be a little less favored in Sword and Shield, but it's still kind of just passable in BDSP anyway. Mega Medicham though, solid A tier. This is an incredible fighting type. Definitely right in between Blaziken and Gallery Zapdos. Mega Medicham is an absolute behemoth as far as Natex anything goes, because unlike with regular Medicham, you naturally speed type base 100s. You also hit a little bit harder. In general, it's just a better version of Medicham. And I think on top of that as well, Medicham having the base 100 speed without needing to lock into a move to outpace Pokemon around that mark is insane for it. Mega Medicham, it's literally just every good thing about Medicham, but better. It's better speed, better offense. That's really it. I don't actually know how to really phrase it better than that. It's just better Medicham. And it hits like a fucking truck. 40 base power for the physical attack too is a huge difference in damage. It's nearly double. So yeah, this is an easy A tier in my opinion. Monferno, this is actually our first F tier fighting type, and I'm kind of shocked we haven't had more, but I did think Monferno honestly is a noteworthy enough fighting type to mention. This was a pretty decent Mon as far as like the NUPU range goes with the Violet, mostly PU to be fair, but it's a cool Violet fighting type that can run stuff like Will-O-Wisp, Slack Off, Taunt, it rocks. You have a lot of different support options that could really benefit a team. So I did want to mention it, albeit it's probably the worst fighting type we went over so far, and it's the worst one we'll go over for a fair bit. But it's noteworthy enough to mention where even though it's still currently the worst Pokemon we've ranked today, I think at the very least that Monferno isn't just some joke presence. Like, it's not like we're ranking, for example, like a Tyrogue on this list. Like, this is a legitimate Pokemon I think that actually does offer stuff to teams. So F tier. Next up, we have Infernape. Infernape's a solid, I think I'm going to put it in A tier. Yeah, I'm going to put it in A tier. I'm going to put it above Breloom. Infernape's a pretty incredible Pokemon in BDSP. It sadly did get kind of shafted by power creep as far as a Natex setting goes, but it's still not terrible by any means. Infernape can definitely benefit from stuff like Z-Moose, for example, and its speed tier is pretty incredible. This is a great Scarfer, great mixed options, great physical special on both sets. It can set up for both physical and special sets. It's literally like a jack of all trades, and it's actually good at everything it does. Even to some degree, defensive sets can kind of work on Infernape, and they've actually had some metagames where they've been like actual Smogon suggested sets, with typically Slack Off and Will-O-Wisp for Toxic, and then you'll go with some sort of offensive option, and the fourth move's usually up in there. Sometimes it's Stealth Rock, sometimes it's Taunt, sometimes it's U-Turn, sometimes it's 2 attacks. It really kind of depends, but it has a lot going for it. A lot of stuff that Infernape really is just one of those Pokemon that adapts to what's good around it, and it will always be kind of usable. So A tier. Megalop. Megalop is an easy A tier. I think that I'm gonna put Megalop. I think as far as fighting goes, Megalop is definitely at the very top of A tier. This generation's been pretty kind to Megalop with stuff like Triple Axle, for example. Also on top of that, Megalopony does have a few other things really going for it. For one, there's not a lot of viable mons that actually outpace Megalopony, and I think this generation, especially with such a boots-heavy meta generation versus going with a Scarfer and then going for webs in tandem with Megalop, it benefits a lot. Not only this, but this generation's been super U-turn heavy in every sense of the word, especially with Teleport now being on defensive Pokemon. So Lopunny being a strong pivot now does help actually a lot with favoring towards how the meta has shaped. As I mentioned before, Triple Axle is an incredibly dangerous move in Megalopony, and while Ice Punch was fine enough, Triple Axle is just a huge different discussion actually if you're talking about Megalopony's viability, and in tandem with stuff like close combat, this is kind of a disastrous Pokemon to have to switch around. Typically the ice fighting alone is enough to handle a lot of different OU teams, and you have other options of course such as Return, which is legal in that decks. You have stuff like U-Turn for pivot, you have fake out support, so you get a lot of options. Even as far as utility goes, stuff like Encore is pretty cool. So easy A tier. This is like the best Mon in A tier in my opinion that we'll probably get. Riolu's noteworthy enough in VGC as a very niche Pokemon. What I will say though is that there's like only one type of team you'd actually run this on, and it's specifically if you're going for a Dynamax Pokemon that you're trying to set up Trick Room with. You're going to max guard turn 1, get the Prankster Trick Room for the second turn, and try and sweep that way, just to try and catch an opponent off guard and to scout what their speed control is. It's really the only time you actually use Riolu, and I know I did mention that I was going to kind of ignore VGC viability in the C range, but it's so much of a different discussion, I think, as far as Riolu's viability goes, just considering the fact that Riolu is outright unusable in singles as far as an actual competitive setting goes. And even still, its VGC usage, it's like a really, really gimmick team, but it does the gimmick really well, actually. So I did want to mention it as a C tier Pokemon. I think if nothing else, this at least has a presence, even if it's super beyond fucking niche. So I felt like that alone was enough. Like I know, for example, this was actually being like ran on Battlespot the other day with Magirna team. I thought it was kind of cool. So people were utilizing Max Guard, Trickery Magirna, and just trying to snowball that way. So the point being is that I think Riolu is noteworthy enough to mention, but I have to break my own rule here of the tiering and put it in C. Regular Lucario, solid B tier fighting. This I'm gonna put it right above regular Heracross, right below Mega. It's a cool mixed attacker. It gets some good priority options with stuff like Vacuum Wave, E-Speed, hoping that just like with Machamp it gets Mach Punch, but I don't think it will. The point being is that Lucario does have a lot going for it. It's still, even physically speaking, priority-wise, it has Bullet Punch, which is pretty cool. You get a ton of good coverage options, both physically and specially, and you get dual setup. You get agility too, which is actually kind of cool on base Lucario at least. Mega doesn't really need it, but base is kind of cool. It's a great Bandit option, great Scarf option, great Specs option even. The point being is that Lucario can really, it's similar to Infernape, but just a tier below in my opinion. Though one edge that this does get is the fighting type that can actually like legitimately pressure opposing fairy types, which is pretty unique as far as ones that actually do hold a presence go. Lucario is probably the best one among that category, but even still, it's not necessarily great at the role. The point being is that it's a good enough Pokemon for B. Mega Lucario, easy S tier. This is actually going to go right above both of these. And I think it's truthfully just because of the fact that Mega Lucario, I think, is a lot harder to switch around. And that might be a little bit surprising at first to hear when you compare Mega Mewtwo's 190 attack stat. But I think Mega Lucario having 145 attack and 140 special attack with adaptability is still pretty dangerous. This has a ton of viable priority. This is usually able to just run 4 attack sets and massacre most teams. You can run a pretty well balanced set too for pretty much any viable Pokemon. For example, if your team fears Ho, throw Rock Slide, because really all you need is coverage for Xerneas, fighting type move. That's it. Anything else is luxury. I can throw on Ice Punch if I'm worried about stuff like Zygarde and Mega Salamence. I can throw on stuff like Stone Edge if I'm really worried about Ho-Oh. I can throw on stuff like E-Speed if I want to try and get a bit of faster options with priority. I have a lot that I can do, so I want to put Mega Lucario in the S tier. I think this is the top of S personally as far as an S tier standing goes. I think you could make a case for S plus as far as fightings go, but I think I'm going to put it in S for now and see where we go. Toxicroak. I'm putting this right next to, actually no, because Toxicroak actually does kind of have some like soft viability in VGC. I'm gonna put it right below Hitmonlee, I think. Toxicroak is a pretty cool offensive Pokemon as far as the singles setting goes. Toxicroak is decent at both being a nice physical and special attacker. It's literally just the slower version of Hisui and Sneasel, but it can do both offenses. It's cool on in VGC on Rain occasionally, albeit not right now when you're running the same 10 Pokemon on every team, but it's still pretty cool. As far as the general Rain Pokemon, it's a cool offensive mon. Usually, typically, when this mon does get viable in VGC, it's run with stuff like regular Tornadus. I think a Toxicroak's decent though. I get some good support options. It's good mixed options. You could really, again, tailor this similar to how Lucario in B tier and Infernape in A tier to handle whatever the fuck you need it to. It's just worse at it than both of these. So C tier. Regular Gallade fucking sucks, but it's at least better than everything else in D so far besides Primeape and Gmax Machamp. And Sneasel, actually, I take that back. It's just a worse Machamp, and regular Gallade, it's kind of a good breaker with 125 attack, and at first that sounds kind of okay, but then you compare Machamp having pure power, and you suddenly forget all about this 125 attack stat. This has a pretty terrible Phys-Def stat. It has an okay 80 base speed. You typically need a Sword Stance off to do anything with this, and there's not a lot that lets you do it. I think this is a solid D tier Pokemon, but it's still D nonetheless. Mega Gallade, on the other hand, is a solid A tier, but I'm going to put it kind of low. I'm going to put it right above Breloom, I think. Mega Gallade is definitely, as far as a Smogon setting goes, or just a general competitive setting goes, that's not Draft League, for my 10 people watching who do Draft League. This is a solid Pokemon, but it's never really good enough to actually make the OU tier. Typically, when you're thinking of Megas that offer more to the Natdex OU metagame, let's look at some. For example, if we're comparing fighting type Megas, as I mentioned before, Lopunny favors a lot more to the momentum heavy metagame that we currently have. And even as far as fighting type Megas go, Magnemite just breaks a lot better, which is important when every team has stuff like a Toxapex, Heatran, and Ferrothorn on every fucking team. Mega Gallade, on the other hand, while it's 10 base faster, it doesn't usually make a difference. Hitting 100 is good enough, and trading out so much offense for that is really not worth it in a lot of games. On top of this as well, if we were to compare this to other Pokemon as far as Gallade's presence goes, it's still kind of slow for Natdex, actually. If we're looking at Natnix Pokemon, for example, we have a lot of base 130s like Mega Lopunny at 135. We have Ash Granite Coco at 132 and 130 respectively. We have Weavile at 125. We have Greninja 122. All of these Pokemon that just outright outpace, and even stuff like Superior that gets kind of closer at 113. Dai is a speed tie, and that's a really good OU Mega, and it can offensively nail Gallade anyway. So I do think there's a lot going out of Gallade's favor, and we didn't even get into the Scarfers either. So I'm going to put this in the A tier. I think it's definitely a lot worse than Smogon, but it's still not a bad Pokemon. Arceus Fighting, this is definitely a really shitty Arceus typing, in all honesty, but it's an Arceus typing, so it gets an S tier. Typically, if I'm running an Arceus, though, I'm going to run something that's actually beneficial to the metagame instead of an Arceus that loses to 1/3 of the Psychic types that are ran. S tier. Emboar. Emboar is a cool breaker. It's a fire type. It's a fighting type, and again, physical attacker that can't really get burned, which is pretty good. It's a decent wall breaker. Reckless is incredible on it. However, caveat: I don't think that the current metagame would favor it if it was in at the same time, though. I think it would be more viable than Toxicroak. This could be a pretty cool NU mod if I had to guess. Typically, I think Emboar was like RU NU last gen, if I remember correctly. So actually, let me double check that, because I'm actually kind of curious now that I'm like bringing it up. Yeah, NUBL. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of where I would actually slot Emboar this gen, to be honest. It's still a really good wall breaker with Reckless, plus also having a really good moveset with stuff like Flare Blitz, Earthquake, Close Combat, Head Smash, etc. It's a decent C tier fighting. Also, Wild Charge for Waters is pretty fucking awesome as a fire type. Girder's up next. Now, Girder's pretty cool. Girder's, again, typically one of those fighting type NFE mons that's noteworthy enough to mention, but it seems just really bad in comparison to what we have today, sadly, because fighting just has a lot of viable Pokemon. As far as Girder's ranking goes, I'd probably put it right above Gallade, in all honesty. It's a really good defog fighting type, even if you're going to try and fit a defogger last second in a team, but typically you're just going to run this with like Drain Punch, Ice Punch, Knockoff, and then some sort of fourth move, which could be like Jab. It could be Drain Punch, to be fair. You could also go with stuff like Facade if you're trying to get an option on here in case you get burned later on. You have a lot of options. I think it's a solid D tier fighting. Conkeldurr, on the other hand, this is a solid B tier fighting. This is probably going to be the highest B tier we have, in all honesty, but Conkeldurr is an amazing wall breaker this gen with Guts. This is really one of those Pokemon I think that's taken advantage of OU in certain very fighting weak metagames. You'll typically see this even on Veil in OU. It's kind of a not bad Pokemon. Conkeldurr is just one of those things that's similar to Bisharp. It'll ebb and flow out of OU very, very rapidly for no real reason at all, other than just because it sucks or it doesn't. But it's not necessarily like, oh, these fighting types are going up in viability, so Conk also is. It's just Conk in particular is, or Conk in particular isn't. It's a decent wall breaker, though. Even outside of, let's say, just the Guts, though, when everyone runs on it, Sheer Force and Iron Fist are still two incredible abilities. It's a Pokemon that you could typically just tailor to hit whatever you need, but it doesn't have the versatility and role structure that stuff like Infernape, Lucario, and Toxicroak has. It's still a solid B tier mon, though. There's a decent low tier Gutsmon. It's literally, I would actually pretty much compare this to Girder, and I think that Sock does a really good job at being a nice offensive fighting type for low tiers. Sturdy is pretty cool on it. They're both pretty decent offensive mons. However, I think that the metagame is caught up to both of them, in all honesty. One thing I will say, though, is that Mold Breaker on Sock is a pretty good ability, as well as on Girder, as well as on Throw, but I think that Throw benefits a lot more from Guts and can't really take advantage of it as much. They're both still decent fighting types. They're both not like actually untierable territory. I think these are both absolutely destructive forces. I'm actually gonna put Girder above, on a Throw above Girder, just because you can actually run a Flame Orb on this, which is pretty useful. I think as far as, despite the fact that they do very different things, they're both pretty interchangeable for how good they are. So I did kind of want to mention that at the same time. They both learn a lot of the same moves. They both handle a lot of the same Pokemon. It just, Sock is a lot better of a Scarfer, and Throw is a lot better of a bulky Pokemon. That's really the only difference. Otherwise, they're both just meant to beat offensive fighting types that will break everything. Both are D tier. Hisui and Lilligant, this is a solid, I think I put this in the top of B, and for Grass, and I'm going to put it there again. It's a really cool Scarf option. Hypothetically, it's a cool Chlorophyll mon. It's a Grass type that can handle a lot of other stuff that Grass would otherwise be resisted by. Its movable is pretty good. I think we just need to see more, truthfully. As far as Lilligant goes, it's not a bad Pokemon in my opinion, and I think it has a lot going for it. Hustle, I think, will kind of shaft it, but it's not because it's not valuable. It's because of the fact that, sadly, Hustle does kind of make it just prone to luck, in a sense, considering you're now going to need to make sure that you hit every move, and Close Combat's pretty nice with a Hustle boost, if you hit it. So it's just one of those things where every move is now Stone Edge, and that does kind of hurt a bit of its viability. It's still really cool though. It's still going to be a cool Scarfer, even with Hustle. It'll still be a solid B tier. Scrafty, decent VGC mon actually. This is a really cool Intimidator, really cool typing. It's able to check a lot of different potent ghost types in the formats that VGC has had, as well as offensive psychics. Scrafty, while it's nowhere near the potency that it was, because right now basically if you're not running Incineroar or Laterus, you're kind of dying. Definitely again similarly ebbs and flows, and it's still a pretty cool singles mon if nothing else. As far as Scrafty's tier goes, I mean it's a solid NU mon. I'm actually going to put this like literally right by Hitmontop, but I'm going to put it right above because I think the Scrafty's a little bit better. Speaking out loud, I think they're pretty comparable because they're both used for similar things as far as doubles goes, but the difference being is that Scrafty is typically used as more of a SpDef piece, and it's typically used in more psychic heavy metas and ghost heavy metas, and Hitmontop's more so just used as like a really good support catch-all mon. And they're both still pretty decent. Scrafty's definitely C tier though. Mienshao, really strong Scar for this gen. It's incredible. Mienshao definitely does benefit a lot from the fact that everything's been really regen heavy, and Mienshao is a really good pivot alongside that. It's a pretty cool Pokemon as far as offensive Z goes. Well, assuming you were to take Nat Dex into account, it's really cool as far as just Galadex goes in general, because a lot of Pokemon struggle to switch in on close combat and reckless high jump kick. As far as just in general Mienshao's viability goes, I think that Mienshao has a lot going for it, in all honesty. I think that one of the best things, though, truthfully, was the fact that it no longer needs Reckless High Jump Kick for fighting damage. Thank you, Game Freak. Close Combat was a great buff on this. But even still, I think that Mienshao has a solid offensive fighting. I'm going to put it right below Conk in the B tiering, in my opinion. Next up, though, we do have Cobalion. Cobalion, I'll be honest, I think this mon's terrible, but I know a lot of people die in this hill. So again, gotta check my bias at the door. It's a B tier fighting type. I think this mon personally just one of those things that does absolutely nothing, but it kind of just exists. To be fair, some teams really do kind of struggle with this Pokemon, and Fighting Steel is a pretty good typing as seen on Lucario. This just is faster, and it trades out some of that offense for the 108 speed, which is a really good speed tier. You get stuff like Rocks and Volts, which is kind of cool, but I don't think this mon ever has a good 4 moveslots, in my opinion. Still, objectively, it does a really good job at what it does, even if I personally just think it's garbage. Terrakion's up next. Terrakion's pretty cool. This is a really solid Z-mon as far as just offensively speaking goes. It's a pretty good mon as far as Galadex goes. It's just kind of a menace, in all honesty. It's not really doubles noteworthy, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be. I'm going to put this right below Conk. This is a really solid breaker for teams. Similarly to Conk, just it's not a Guts breaker. It's a Scarf or Band breaker or Dual Dance breaker. It's a solid B tier. Virizion, this one will not be joining the B tier actually. Virizion's actually going to go in the D tier right below Sneasel. Virizion kind of just is shit. It's one of those Pokemon that isn't really able to actually keep up a lot, in my personal opinion. It's for example, if let's say we were to look at Virizion's standard rating, it's literally PUBL. It's a fighting type that, yeah, it can cover. It's a grass type that can cover steals and all these other things that grass can't really hit super effectively. But at the same time, though, it has a pretty terrible moveslot. As far as the moveset goes, it's both base 90 offenses. The setup for special is only Calm Mind, and it already has pretty incredible SpDef there anyway. I would have loved to see Bulk up on this Pokemon, truthfully. I think that would actually help it a lot, because while I know it's a bit of a slower setup option, Virizion's physical defense is only 72, which kind of hurts if you're going for a bit of a bulkier setup variation. And at a Pokemon that only has 90 offense, I do think that's kind of an important thing, is to give it something with actual sustain, especially when you do give this Pokemon other tools to do so, stuff like Taunt, Synthesis, etc. So I think they should have really leaned into giving this Pokemon bulk up, and I think it would have actually helped a lot as far as low tier physical sets go. Even still, Calm Mind's not terrible. It's just, I think that this is one of those things that there's just usually a better option for your team. Solid D tier. Keldeo. Keldeo's definitely caught up to Power Creep, or Power Creep's caught up to Keldeo, I should say. This is definitely going to be top of B tier though. This has some certain OUs where this is actually a kind of a menace. As far as Keldeo goes, I'd put the Secret Sword in here, but realistically they're both the fucking same. Keldeo's a decent Scarfer though. It's a decent just water fighting type, is pretty incredible. It's one of those Pokemon that even if it's not like a top tier OU Pokemon, it's kind of hard to actually make Keldeo be an outright bad Pokemon. But I will say that this meta has done a pretty good job at seeming like it is, considering stuff like Pex and Slowbro and Slowking have been all over the place, and they kind of do just wall this thing to all hell and back. Still a cool UU-mon though. It's still definitely an amazing Scarfer as far as the UU tier goes. Amazing Specs Pokemon, cool Calm Mind option. Just sadly Power Creep's caught up to it. I'm actually going to put it, I think I'm going to put it right below Conk, because Conk has had a lot more surgeons in OU this gen, and I think it's a little more consistent. Meloetta Pirouette. Meloetta Pirouette's kind of cool. I think this is a really decent offensive fighting, but you do kind of need to run mixed Meloetta to actually ever get it. So I'm going to take a lot of points off for that one, actually. Despite Relic Song being a really good move, I'm going to put it right above Riolu, right below Toxicroak, considering the fact you do need to dedicate a move slot to a special move on a Pokemon that, keep in mind, Meloetta Pirouette only has like 77 special attack, and its physical and speed, its physical offense and speed are both 128, which are incredible. But again, you need to dedicate such a physical heavy mon to having only 3 coverage options because you need the 4th to pop into Pirouette form. If they make this like an item based thing, this would instantly be a solid OU Pokemon and it would be a really high A tier. I could even see the case for it being like the top of A tier in all honesty, because it's just baby Megalop, but it still has a lot of stuff going for it, like Serene Grace, which is incredible. But sadly though, you need to run it off of base Meloetta, which hurts it a lot because as an individual Pokemon, this is pretty good. As Meloetta's physical counterpart, not so much. Chestnut, on the other hand, this is a decent C-tier fighting type in my opinion. I'm going to put it literally just right above Emboar. It's a cool spiker, cool belly drum mon. I said this recently in the grass tier list, which we just did a couple weeks ago as of you guys watching this, but it feels like literally yesterday that I was going off about this. I wonder why. The point being is that this gets a lot of options. Spikes are pretty cool, stuff is pretty cool. Spiky Shield's also just a really good protect option because it's a really good way to punish physical contact mons. Generally speaking, I think that Chestnut's decent. I just wish it was faster than 64. Like if this was an 85 speed Pokemon, I think this would be a really high B tier and even like a low A tier potentially. And it's mostly just because I think the belly drum sets would be a lot better. As we see from Como, for example, it's a Pokemon that could typically take advantage of belly drum sets. And grass fighting offensively is not bad, and this has a lot of other options like Earthquake as well to take advantage of, where truthfully you could run like sub belly drum, Earthquake, and Drain Punch and just kind of tear teams. So definitely a solid C tier fighting. Pangoro gets a D tier. I'm gonna put it right below Hisui and Sneasel. It's a fighting type that can handle opposing psychics, which is pretty cool with a stab. Parting shot's great on it. I just think that Pangoro sadly has gotten kind of caught by power creep. Well, no, I say that I put Riolu right above it. It's kind of a huge metric actually. I'm putting Riolu in D tier. Because I feel like I'm kind of losing arguments with like every Pokemon I want to rank lower because Riolu's too high. And I still think it's noteworthy enough in VGC. It's just these Pokemon are significantly miles better. And they have actual usage in their tiers is the difference. But Pangoro is still not bad. I think that Pangoro realistically, this is where I'm settling, final answer. But Pangoro is still a decent fighting type that can actually handle opposing psychics. It's a really good banded Pokemon. The speed tier sadly though at base 58 is kind of shit. At the same time though, this typing is so good offensively speaking, it doesn't really matter a ton. Solid C tier. Hawlucha, easy A tier. If anyone's ever played an OU game ever, you know this is a solid terrain Pokemon. It has like no VGC presence, but that's okay because just throw this with any of the 4 terrain Pokemon that capitalize on all of the usage in OU between Rillaboom and the other 3 Tapus. And you'll honestly find something to throw a seed on this and just start taking out some Pokemon. It does have a couple issues as far as common OU things like Pex, for example, and Helmet Landorus, but you could typically pair this with something else that can handle those Pokemon. For example, Lele's a really good breaker with Lucha because while it's not going to super effectively hit every single Hawlucha switch in, you'll be able to get a good dent on a lot of them at the very least. So I gotta give Hawlucha a solid A tier for sure. Hisui and Decidueye, oh my god, I really hate that I have to go over this one again, but this is an F tier fighting. It's an F tier fighting. I don't even want to go on the tangent, but I'm going to. No good physical fighting move. It has just a missed opportunity. This should have been bulkier. It should have been faster. It just, fuck this mon. I fucking hate this mon. This mon has pissed me off. I had to go over it 2 times in 2 days. Don't like this mon. A lot of missed opportunity here. Decidueye Hisuian form fucking sucks. This will never be a good Pokemon because it's never going to get a fighting move that's better than like Brick Break when it really needs like a close combat or a high jump kick. And it missed its opportunity in my opinion, because if we were to even just, let's say, look at high jump kick, right? So for high jump kick, this was a move that I believe was in the games, if I remember correctly. No, it wasn't. But close combat was. And you know what Pokemon didn't get close combat? Hisui and Decidueye. It's not going to get a good fighting move ever. F tier. Crabominable, this is a cool fighting type. Definitely low end for sure, but it's above Poliwrath and Hitmonchan at least. It's pretty cool at the very least as being a fighting type that can handle opposing flyings, which is a really good stab of ice. And fighting ice, as mentioned earlier when I was discussing stuff like Lopunny, is a pretty terrifying type to have to switch around. Most teams really do not like switching around that because typical fighting checks include stuff like Landorus Therian, ice type. Flying types like Zapdos, ice type. Tornadus Therian, ice type. all of these do kind of actually get kind of shit on by Ice Stab. So I think Crabominal has that going for it, but it's way too slow. You typically would need to basically pop Trick Room on it. It's kind of cool in doubles though. I know there's some betas in 17 where this is like an okay-ish Pokemon in Trick Room. Definitely think that if this was currently in Sword and Shield, it would probably be an NUPumon. The typing is just way too good to really tier it any lower than that in my opinion, but it's a solid D tier Pokemon as far as our tier list goes. Beware is a really good Pokemon actually. I think that I'm gonna give Beware right above Hitmonlee in all honesty. Beware is a decent low tier, just a good low tier fighting in my personal opinion. It's one of those things that similarly to stuff like Machamp and Hariyama, that it has a bunch of really good abilities. Unnerve is great for a lot of different berry Pokemon, but typically though, the ability that this Pokemon takes advantage of is Fluffy, which makes it an actually incredibly good physical tank. While the fire damage is obviously a little bit annoying, at the same time though, you don't really care because there's not a lot of viable fire types. And even still, again, Unnerve is still not a bad ability depending on what you're playing, but ultimately though, you're typically running Fluffy because it's just a really good tank. Great Bandit Pokemon, cool Swords Dance Pokemon. It's just a great Pokemon, C tier. Next up we have Passimian, great Scarfer. I'm literally just gonna put it right above Machamp though. And right above oh my god, right above Primeape. Oh my god, I cannot talk, I'm so sorry. I know this is an NU Pokemon. I think Primeape honestly would be too. And they're pretty interchangeable. It really just depends, in my personal opinion, on if you value the speed or the attack more. It has pretty near identical coverage. It misses out on a couple of things, sure, like for example, Passimian doesn't get Ice Punch, which is kind of sucks. But at the same time though, it still gets a lot of other things like Gunk Shot, which Primeape only gets Poison Jab, which is again, not great in that regard. Actually, no, they both get Gunk Shot. What does Passimian get over this then? I guess it's just the higher attack stat, and it gets a lot more grass moves, though even still Primeape gets Seed Bomb. The point being is I think it's really just the fact that Passimian's a lot more of an offensive Pokemon, and it's meant to just be more of a breaker for low tier, which is pretty good, but Primeape's still a lot better of a cleaner, in my personal opinion. I think they're literally interchangeable, though. I think that the fact that Primeape has an actual low tier usage right now, and, Passimian does, and Primeape literally is based off of BDSP, and I'm going to give Passimian literally the tier above, well, the rank above just for that. Fighting type Savali. Fighting type Savali is not really a great Savali type. As far as Savali typing goes, it's pretty underwhelming. Similarly to Arceus at the very least. I'm going to put it above, well, I'm going to put it at the bottom of D tier. This is one of those things where I think that, again, Savali could kind of do a fighting type role well, because if we're going to look at coverage, stuff like multi-attack plus Ice Fang could be kind of cool in a Swords Dance set, but you don't really use Savali for stuff like that because fighting memory fucking sucks. D tier. Calmu. Calmu is pretty decent in all honesty. I'm gonna actually put this thing right above Mega Gallade. This has a pretty cool doubles presence right now in Spikemuth Cup. It's a pretty decent OUUmon in Sword and Shield. In Sword and Shield, just generally speaking. It was banned from UU actually for being too good. This is a really cool Natdex Pokemon as well, considering you get Clangorous Soul and the Clamoring Scales combination. The point being is you have both of the multi-setup moves for Omni boosting, and Como is actually a pretty viable mon. You could still get stuff like Iron Defense sets, Sub Belly Drum, etc. So you have a lot of options for Como, and I think it's versatile enough to where it at least deserves the ranking above Gallade. Easy A tier. Next up, we have Buzzwole. Amazing fighting type, incredible Pokemon. Benefits a lot from stuff like Weavile and Landorus being so terrible at damaging it, and also still pressuring Pokemon like Keytran, Slowbro, etc. Amazing A tier. It's great at spreading Toxic. It's great at being a physical defensive wall. Even Pokemon like Weavile that do run coverage sometimes, like if you were to run Aerius and Weavile, you can still take it and just revenge the fuck out of Weavile. You would basically need to switch in on like two of them to actually, well, on switching on an Airlace into then taking another one for Weavile to actually threaten you successfully. So I'm gonna give this a solid A tier. Even with flying moves that people think massacre this mon, they don't do shit. It's just like with Scizor with hidden powers. Pheromosa, solid S tier, incredible Pokemon as far as the fighting goes. It's just, these fighting megas all are so fucking broken that it makes Pheromosa look shit in comparison. But this is a great Scarfer, it's a cool Crividence mon, it's a great Life Orb Pokemon, it's cool with choice that's not Scarf. And Scarf it's even better with, because you can revenge other Scarfers or other Dragon Dance Pokemon. It's cool in VGC with Speed Swap, albeit it's a lot more niche these days, but you could still definitely do it on Pokemon like Snorlax or other Trick Room abusers, maybe like a Calyrex too. I've actually seen that a few times. The point being is this is really cool as far as general fighting type goes. It's a solid S tier. We have Marshadow, our finally first S+. This is the one I was going into about how power creep caught up, and not even just necessarily in stats, but also in just fucking mechanics. Marshadow's Spectral Thief is such a fucking broken move, and Ghost Fighting as a typing is insane. I'm actually really glad that Marshadow is such a shit stat total of only base like 600, because oh my god, could you imagine if they gave Marshadow like an actual like Ubersmon stat line? Like even just 650 on this Pokemon. Let's picture it out right now. So Game Freak's trying to make Marshadow, instead of just a Pixie, they're trying to make it like a new mascot Pokemon. We'll give it 670. That's a pretty even box art level. So this is 670. What stats do you think they're going to buff on this? They're going to probably give it 135 attack and speed. That's 20. They're going to have 50 left over at this point. Maybe throw another 10 in attack. It's 145 now. Most box arts that have at least 140-ish in their primary attack set anyway. It's not too out there. 40 left over. You're throwing like 20 more in Phys Def and 10 more in bulk. This now suddenly has 100 unanimous for bulk stats. What? And I know that's really perfect too. So let me actually even make it really bad. Let's say that we give Marshadow like 15 special attack. It's 105 now. And we still have like 25 left over. We'll give, let's say, 5 to HP. It's now 95. We'll give like 20 to, and then we'll give, we'll just give 20 to Phys Def. It's now 100. It's still really fucking good. A 95 HP, 100 Phys Def, and 90 Spidef Mon would still be incredible. And again, Marshadow's still broken without that. It's still obnoxiously broken. I'm just more so saying that, oh my fucking god, I'm glad they did not give this a box art stat line. That's all I was trying to point out there. I know that some people are going to probably say I was trying to go on a tangent, or they didn't get what I was saying there, or say, oh, you know, that's unrealistic. I just wanted to mention, I'm just thankful they did not give this a box art stat line. It's just not everything has to have a point. S+ for sure though. This is the best fighting type ever. Grapple Locked. This is actually probably gonna get. This is one of our worst fighting types for sure. Octolock is a pretty good move as far as just fighting type moves go. But oh my god, this one just kind of does everything that all these other D tiers do worse, but it does them all at the same time. It's similar to like how I've personally view Hitmontop, but this one actually is just like that. For example, it's a cool trapping option that can try and punish different stalls. But as far as punishing different stalls, you have stuff like Throw with Guts, you have stuff like Calder, or no, I said I was going to come in the D tier. I mean, you still have like G-Max Machamp, but even if we ignore that for just, let's say, a Smogon tiering, you still have stuff like Taunt and Stall Breaker Virizion. You still have stuff like Gallade that can definitely still Stall Break. Primeape can take advantage of Default on a Defiant Pokemon, whereas Grapple Locked, and I mean, it's just here. It's definitely one of the worst fighting types, but it's not worse than Volley Fighting. D tier. Surfetch, solid C tier. It's a pretty cool breaker. Scrappy is an amazing option to break on this Pokemon. You have options like First Impression, which is great for handling a lot of fast offensive psychics. You have incredible offensive moves with stuff like Close Combat and Brave Bird, and Knockoff as well for other psychic types that are slower than you. And Surfetch is a 65 base speed stat. I know this isn't some really fast Pokemon, but it's not bad speed-wise either. And its bulk is kind of okay at 62, 95, 82, but it could be worse. I think it's a solid C tier. Phalanx, I'll be honest, there's kind of merit for F tier, but I'm gonna put it in D. I'm gonna put it above Grapple Lock and Hitmonchan at least, if nothing else, and Polygraph. Phalanx does have kind of a little bit going for it. For one, Battle Armor and Defiant are two really cool abilities, and its signature move, No Retreat, is pretty good if you're gonna commit to a sweep. This has merit, in my opinion. I don't think it's some top tier Mon or anything, but it's one of those fighting types I can never really see being, like, as far as PU fighting types go, it's never one of those I would say, even if it's not tiered, where I could outright say this sort of no use. Because once you start getting the PU territory, you're getting into Pokemon that's basically just a matter of favoritism. It doesn't really matter what you use in those tiers. You can make literally anything work, which I know you could technically do that in any tier. Tiering is all just a myth anyway, but I think the Phalanx is still definitely a low ceiling and high floor as far as low tier goes, because again, you would really farm anyone who doesn't know what they're doing with No Retreat and just go for stuff like Close Combat, Mega Horn, etc., and you'll kind of have a field day. It's still a D tier, just really bad in D tier. Zamazenta itself, I'm gonna put right above Pheromosa. Zamazenta Crowned though, I'm putting right below Pheromosa. Zamazenta Regular is a pretty cool Scarf option. Well, no. Personal bias aside, I think they're both actually better, and I think that Zamazenta Crown's actually been pulling up a lot. It's had a lot that it's been going for recently, such as being a really good check to stuff like Kyurems and other ice types. It's been a pretty good check to a lot of other Pokemon as far as an Uber setting goes. Like, for example, it's a pretty decent Dracovish switch-in. It's a pretty decent check to Pokemon. I mean, there's not really a lot of versatility, but it's just kind of there. I wouldn't say that these are like some top tier Pokemon, but again, when you're able to check stuff like Kyurems and G-Darm and Weavile, it's pretty good at those roles. And I think that while the meta currently favors Crown more, I think its Zamazenta still is pretty equal as far as viability potentially goes. It just depends really on what the meta is like, in my personal opinion. And right now, the meta favors a Mon that can nuke Calyrex while still being a really good fighting type. It matters that the fact this is a really good physical Ice switch in. It matters this is a really good physical Dark switch in. So they're both S tier for pretty much the same reasons. Shifu single gets S, it's bottom of S though, but it's a pretty good option offensively speaking. Fighting Dark again, incredible typing. The fact that this is able to break past Protect is really good. Gmax single Shifu is literally just a worse version of it, and it's only because you're not clicking Wicked Blow. They're both still incredible Pokemon. Shifu Rapid, on the other hand, gets a solid right above Buzzwole. It's a pretty, actually right below Buzzwole. No, I'm going to put it right above because this has actual VGC presence. It's pretty near viable. It's about as viable as like all these sort of Pokemon singles wise, but this also has a really good VGC presence, which isn't really to be underrated in my opinion. Similarly, the Gmax presence of Rapid Striker Shifu, it just, you're not clicking the crit move, so it's objectively worse. But I will give Rapid Shifu this, is that I do think that Rapid Shifu is currently still a pretty decent Mono OU, even despite all the helmet. It just goes to show how broken Surging Strike is as a move, to where even with all the helmets getting off a free 50% on this Pokemon in theory, or forcing Protective Pads, which gives up a Choice Band or Scarf option, it's still able to find a way to be a really viable Pokemon on the tier, which I think is a skill in itself, in all honesty. But even still, this is an absolute menace in VGC, a Protect-ridden meta where this just ignores it. No thank you to either of these. They're both really strong Pokemon. Sneasler is a really strong offensive fighting potentially. This has really good speed tier, really good ability to handle opposing fairies, which would typically switch in. It's just super fucking psychic weak at the other end of the spectrum. So I'm going to put it A tier. I'm going to put it right below stuff like Como, Infernape, etc. Because I do think this is a noteworthy enough fighting type, but at the same time though, I do think that there are definitely some things that it's going to need, such as Mach Punch. It'll probably need a slightly better ability, but Poison Touch isn't terrible. I think though that unlike something like a Weavile, where Dark and Ice is an incredible offensive typing for what's actually really viable, there's a decent amount of mons that could soft check at least one or the other pretty easily with Sneasler, and I think that truthfully this would have rather had the 130 speed and 120 attack than the 130 attack and 120 speed. That's another huge detriment, because then it at least could have speed tied Coco, which would have been really incredible. The point being is this is still a solid A tier Pokemon, but it's just missed opportunity everywhere. What did you guys think of the tier list though? If you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more content just like this. With that said, of course, shoutouts to our channel members being Zeke0, Josh K Ultra Player, and Mia. If you want to go the extra mile and support the channel monetarily, link to the channel members page is down below, or you could just click it on the homepage of the channel or near the subscribe button. And in case you want to click on any other links while you're down there, we have links to this tier list as well as the Twitter and Discord. If you guys want to keep up with videos, Twitter and Discord are a great place, as well as just general interaction. But with that said, I will see you guys in Monday's video. Until then, peace out, guys.